to form them into a Polish army to fight alongside the Allies. Germany throws Stalin's armies back to the gates of Moscow by the winter of 1941, so the Soviet dictator considers this compromise. He agrees to Sikorski's suggestion: anything to resist the overwhelming Nazi war machine. To assist the Russians, Britain sends supplies of weapons to the Soviet Union by convoy. In October 1941, Sikorski flies to Russia via North Africa. He manages to convince Stalin to free the remaining Polish soldiers. They move south to the British Middle East to battle the Germans in the Mediterranean. Stalin is contemptuous of the Poles and thinks they should stay to fight in the ranks of his Red Army, but he allows them to go. Ominously, thousands of Polish officers are missing. Still, as events later prove, Sikorski's diplomacy has saved countless lives. Sikorski then returns to North Africa to inspect the Polish brigade that was helping the British in the Desert War against the Germans. Here at last is an opportunity for Polish troops to fight a successful ground war against the Nazis. Sikorski was finally an Allied commander. The Free Poles fight fiercely in defense of Tobruk and help halt the German advance in Egypt. In March 1942, Sikorski takes a flight to the United States to brief President Roosevelt on the Polish situation and the uneasy relationship with Russia. Halfway across the Atlantic, panic breaks out on his Liberator aircraft. A bomb is discovered on board. It is quickly defused, but the incendiary bomb is the kind used to destroy an aircraft after it crash lands. It is a saboteur's weapon. At the time, the bomb's appearance is considered a simple packing error, but it is the first of several disturbing incidents that would take place that year. Just 7 months later, Sikorski again visits the United States. This time he flies in a twin-engine Lockheed Hudson. He is on a mission to discuss the ongoing animosity between Poland and Russia with President Roosevelt. His aircraft coasts down the runway and smoothly takes off. But just as it reaches a height of 100 feet, both its engines suddenly fail. The pilot is forced to crash land. The aircraft skids for 600 feet. No one is badly injured. But this second airplane malfunction seems to be more than a coincidence. For 3 more months, Sikorski and Stalin are locked in an uneasy truce. But in February 1943, a startling, horrific discovery sets the two leaders on a crash course that threatens the very survival of the Allied cause. In eastern Poland, in the Katyn forest, the bodies of thousands of Polish soldiers are found buried in pits. This was not the work of Germans, but of Soviet execution squads. It is proof that the Soviet Union had executed thousands of Polish prisoners in 1939. Stalin had lied to Sikorski when he told him that all remaining Poles not enlisted in the war had been allowed to leave Russia. Instead, Polish officers were shot in the back of the head. An enraged Sikorski demands a Red Cross investigation of the site. The confrontation is a major crisis for the Allies, especially for Britain's wartime leader, Winston Churchill. He tells his cabinet it cannot afford to take sides in the dispute between Poland and Russia. Sikorski insists on an official investigation. He has no choice but to formally break off diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union. In retaliation, the Soviet Union backs its own Polish government in exile on Russian soil. It even creates a Red Polish Army which fights to reconquer Poland from the Germans. Total disaster looms over the fragile alliance. Churchill is desperate to defuse the situation and decides a diversion is needed for Sikorski and his angry Polish troops in the Middle East. Churchill tells Sikorski to visit his soldiers and calm their concerns. Is this simply a diversionary tactic, or did Churchill have a more sinister reason for getting Sikorski out of the country? His leadership at a crossroads, Sikorski prepares for the most crucial mission of his career. In May 1943, General Sikorski is given a modified Liberator airplane for his mission to the Middle East. The fragile alliance between Russia and exiled Poles hangs on the brink of disaster after the mass grave of murdered Poles is discovered in the Katyn forest. Thousands of Polish officers had been secretly executed at the hands of the Russians. At Prime Minister Churchill's urging, General Sikorski makes plans to visit Polish troops in the Middle East to calm their anger. Sikorski's plan is to fly from London to Gibraltar before heading to Cairo. While midway to Gibraltar, a horrifying message is received at Polish headquarters in London. General Sikorski's plane has crashed at Gibraltar and all passengers have been killed. Grief-stricken Polish ministers immediately ask for confirmation, but they are told that Sikorski's plane landed safely at Cairo. The message appears to be a terrible hoax. But perhaps someone had merely jumped the gun. Upon arriving in Cairo, General Sikorski reviews the Polish troops assigned to the Allied invasion of Italy. He meets with General Władysław Anders, commander of Polish troops in the Middle East. Anders is a popular commander and Sikorski's rival to lead the Poles in exile. It is well known that there is no love lost between the two. Sikorski manages to calm his troops. With his mission complete, the Polish leader, accompanied by his daughter, plans to return to London after a stop in Gibraltar. Sikorski flies in the same aircraft with the same pilot, but 3 new passengers join the return flight. The flight is also burdened with potential political complications. The Soviet ambassador to Britain will arrive in Gibraltar at the same time as Sikorski. Ivan Maisky is Stalin's representative in London. For obvious reasons, he and Sikorski cannot both stay in the governor's residence. The British governor, Mason MacFarlane, solves the problem diplomatically. Sikorski stays in the governor's residence. But both groups of officials are too close for comfort. Their airplanes are parked on the same runway. Sikorski's plane is guarded on the ground and 1 sentry is ordered to sleep in the Liberator overnight. Yet in spite of the precautions, the plane is still vulnerable to sabotage. On the evening of July 4th, 1943, Sikorski and his party say farewell to the governor of Gibraltar and climb into Liberator AL-523. Czech pilot Edward Max Pachal is concerned about overloading and orders that some luggage be removed. At 10 past 11, the control tower clears his plane for takeoff. Douglas Martin is a radio operator for British intelligence. who is based on the Rock of Gibraltar that night. From there, he can watch the aircraft heading for the open sea. The plane's engines roar at full throttle and the plane races down the runway to the takeoff point. The runway is short, but the Liberator lifts off well before the end of the strip and reaches a height of 150 feet before leveling off. The pilot then puts it into a slight dive to reach the required climbing speed of 155 miles per hour. This technique is often used with heavily loaded airplanes like the Liberator. But as Pachal later reports, when he tries to pull the machine out of its dive, the steering column is blocked. He only has time to shout, "Crash landing," before the plane plunges into the sea. The aircraft floats on the surface for 7 minutes. But as rescue boats rush to the Liberator, it suddenly capsizes. The pilot is the only survivor. 4 other dead bodies are found. One has a terrible head wound and is wearing only a shirt and trousers. It is General Sikorski. He died inside the airplane. Among the other bodies recovered, there is no sign of Sikorski's daughter. Her body is never found. Sikorski's remains are returned by ship to Britain. His death is a profound blow to Polish aspirations. He had worked diligently to defend the freedom of his people in the most horrific circumstances. His deputy, Stanisław Mikolajczyk, takes over as Polish Prime Minister. A team of expert divers investigates the downed aircraft. Sikorski's personal attaché case is found and handed to the governor of Gibraltar, but it is never seen again. 2 official inquiries are conducted, one British, one Polish. The disaster is attributed to a mechanical failure. But the investigations do nothing to stop rumors from circulating immediately after the crash. It is obvious that several powerful leaders wanted Sikorski out of the way. The most extreme rumor is that Winston Churchill could have been behind an assassination attempt on the troublesome Polish leader. The rumor reemerges many years later. In the 1960s, a controversial German play called Soldiers by playwright Rolf Hochhuth points the finger at Churchill. The accusation is followed up by an equally controversial British historian, David Irving, who claims that Britain had both motive and opportunity. Sikorski's pilot, Edward Pachal, denies involvement in any plot and sues for libel. He is supported by Churchill's own grandson and wins the suit.
I am very glad that we got a positive result from the court, and not only because my name was cleared, but the name of late Sir Winston Churchill, and that was the main point I was after.
But despite Pachal's vindication in court, are there any grounds for believing that Churchill ordered Sikorski's death? There is nothing but circumstantial evidence that he wished to rid himself of the Polish leader. Churchill knew Britain could not win the war alone, even with the help of the United States. The pact between the 3 major allies had to remain intact. That meant keeping Stalin and Russia happy. In Eastern Europe, the Soviet army was fighting a titanic battle with Nazi Germany. More troops are engaged on this front than in any other area. The battle in Europe will be won or lost there. Churchill fears that Stalin could be tempted to make a separate peace with Hitler. In that case, Hitler could turn all his troops against Britain and America and doom the Allies to failure. Stalin wants the Western Allies to open a second front in Europe to reduce Nazi power on the Eastern Front. This was why Churchill and Roosevelt agreed to invade Italy in the summer of 1943. If Churchill was willing to launch a major offensive in the Mediterranean,